Well, it's an early profiling day. It's about 6 in the morning, trying to get started, and I need some coffee.
Daddy,
What's up?
really quick.
Uh-huh.
One day, can you buy this Mario called Super Mario Maker where you get to make your own world? So
Yeah.
So you get to like put like Yoshi, like you can pick things.
Uh-huh.
So one day can you get me that Super Mario Maker so I can pick whichever level I want, so it doesn't have to be hard or easy. Find where you're Mario and you can go backwards. I just wanted like one where you're not like Irish Mario and you can go backwards.
Okay.
I wanted one where you're like Mario and you can go backwards.
Okay. Yeah. All day, Mario. Hey, Sooze.
Well, hey.
It sounds great, but I don't know if you noticed, I kind of need a haircut.
Are you literally gonna go get a haircut?
You want to go?
Oh gosh, sure.
Maybe it's not the best use of time on profiling day, but I've really been noticing it in a lot of videos, and I feel like people take you less seriously when you're a little bit unkept.
Like you gotta look good to like be the part. Is that what you're saying?
Dress for the job you want, not the job you have.
I see. Okay.
My wife made me this haircut appointment, and how weird would it be if you're making a video about like profiling in a day, and then halfway through the video your hair is shorter.
Right. People
like,
would know.
Who gets a haircut in like in between like shots?
Right.
So it's kind of like it has to be part of the story.
You don't want people wondering. You
No.
gotta fill in the gaps.
It would be very distracting.
Yeah. So I had this guy come to me at my church, and his basic premise was, I have the same pedals that you have,
Yeah.
but my tone is, I'm not happy with my tone, and I like when I hear you play. You know, so it was one of those things where it's like, okay, so we got together, and, you know, our boards are very similar. Like, we have, you know, both GHS overdrives. He's got Timeline, Big Sky like I do. And,
Right, he's got the whole worship setup.
yeah, like he has the tools in front of him to sound good, and part of it too is I think I've had him for, you know, I've had the Timeline for 7 years, and like I just know it so well, and
Yeah.
So it might be that the patches might, you know, I send them to him, and maybe that will help a little bit. But kind of what it came down to was, you know, it wasn't the answer that he wanted, but it was like what you're playing is so much more important than the tone that you play it through. You know, the tone has to be there.
Yeah.
You know, you can't just play dry and be like, oh, that's perfect. But you have to think about how you're using the gear, you know, instead of just dialing up a good sound. You know, I even played through his rig for a little bit, just kind of like we went back and forth.
And it sounded like you.
It was just sounded like me again, you know? And
Right,
so
right.
that part of, and that's not a popular answer when you want to find like the right piece of gear to like finish your board or whatever.
It's so true that we have this idea tone is in the fingers, and I think so much of that is like your technique, your vibrato, the chords you use. I know the Sooze's vibrato. I know the Sooze's, like we were just talking about this, and I was like, one of the things that I think makes you sound like you, Sooze, which we get this question a lot, like about your playing, oh, how does he get that tone or something? One is you use a pretty light pick. You get that kind of thing that the Edge gets, that reiki pick sound.
Flip it upside down.
I think the flip it upside down. You use the rounded part. You're not using the point.
Part,
yeah. So the rounded grippy part, like the grippy grady part.
Yeah.
And I think if you listen to that, if someone shows you, here's the Sooze playing with that part of the pick and with the other part of the pick, you hear what part of the tonality is that.
Oh, yeah.
Because sometimes you play that, especially on the Gretsch stuff with the delay, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that is like beautiful. And then the other thing is, you use voicings a lot that I think are popular, but that really work with a lot of wet stuff. Like one thing we talked about is that 1-5-3 voicing, right? That it's just playing the sort of the like A power chord style, right? The A-shaped power chord, right? With the root on the 5th string, and then removing that middle finger, removing that extra 1, so that it really goes 1, 5, skip string, 3
on top,
right? 3 on top. That is such a pleasing sound when you have a ton of delay and reverb. It's full, but it's also, there's space for like all the effect to come out. And that's something I see you do a lot in your playing.
Yeah, play 3 notes instead of 6.
Right.
You know, and I was kind of showing him a couple tricks in terms of like you can turn the tone down, darken things so that you can turn the mix up. I think that was a big thing, especially with reverb.
Sure.
You know, just darken that reverb and then turn it up. You know, so it's actually louder, but it's not as like in your face or like brittle sounding.
It doesn't fight the guitar, right? And isn't that why we love analog delay? We love the darkness on the repeats because it doesn't get in the way and cloud your playing, and it works so well, especially when you're playing like here's like sorry, this person's tailgating me.
That person?
It was that lady right there. Look, she's going hella fast. I don't know what your problem is. She has a handicap placard. She really should drum her car.
I don't even know if I got that. But...
Anyway,
we now have evidence of a terrible driver here in Middle Tennessee.
Isn't that why we love analog delay so much? It's like we love the darkness of the repeats because it doesn't get in the way and cloud sort of your playing of the guitar, especially with a bright sounding guitar. It lets that come through, but then you have so much washiness and fullness, but it doesn't fight you. That's a sound of worship music, right? Like we talked about down the podcast, what is the sound of like worship guitar? I think it's fairly bright, overdriven guitar with like rhythmic delay, often analog, darker, and like very large spatial kind of verbs.
And in talking to him, I noticed how much modulation I use. Like he was saying, is there a chorus pedal on? And I was like, no. When I thought about it, like my timeline, I have like a dual delay timeline I use like 80% of the time. And it's got a good amount of modulation on it. And then my main 3 reverb patches, all of them have modulation. So like every single time I play, something is like moving and like, you know. So I think that's also what you're hearing if you just play like a stock delay and so just like a normal verb with no movement, you'll pick that up. You'll hear that, you know, and in terms of the spatial character of the sound, you know.
And mod is back in. Modulation is very much back in. Did it ever leave? I don't know. It's definitely back in right now. So use your mod pedals. What do you think is like, how do you play differently when you play with another guitar player on a Sunday morning?
That's a good question. I'm the only guitar player this weekend, and so I was actually thinking of that kind of stuff. One of the things too is we use backing tracks, you know, for Ableton, and so you know, I do those, you know, so I'll make sure that there's some rhythm stuff in there. I'll make sure that there's, you know, I'm not just the only guitar sound coming through. But a lot of times I go more towards rhythm. Like if I can only choose one or the other, I want to have like that, the chord changes are represented, like the feel is good, like on stage or whatever. And I've kind of gotten into this. I watched, do you know Paul David? Is it Paul David's? On YouTube.
Awesome YouTube channel.
I watched an episode the other day where the title of the episode is How to Play Melody with Chords.
Right.
You know, and I was like, dude, that's actually really applicable for worship. You know, so. Like this I believe we're doing, you know, and I was practicing like laying down the chord and then something on top and then chord, you know, so getting a lead line, not just skipping over it, but also almost comping for myself, giving myself a chord, and then hitting something up higher and kind of covering both jobs of, you know, what our rhythm guy would normally do and what I would do as a lead guitar player. So, and then trying to not do that when there's 2 guitar players. Just do lead.
It's really interesting you say that because it's so obvious to me, like when I first met you, that I watched your playing and I said, now here's a guy who plays guitar a lot by himself. And what I mean by that is, I felt like I went through a real period where I felt like I was playing with bands so much, and I almost never was playing guitar by myself. And so I was almost never playing in a style where the guitar sounds good by itself. It was always like very segmented. I was always playing with another guitar player, and so my thinking became very, high lead versus rhythm low,
Mm-hmm.
right? And while that's a good way to approach it, and that's kind of how I approach it at my church, me and the other guitar players will just walk in and I'll just say, I don't think of it in terms of really lead and rhythm anymore. I think of it in terms of high and low.
Yeah.
But listening to you, especially in all your demo stuff with, like that we do with Tone Junkie, you often always go back to those low bass notes. It's almost like you're always referring to a progression. Even when you're just starting out with like, here's some high noodly stuff, you're always going back to a progression so that we get into some feel of a thing, which is kind of it's how guitar sounds good by itself.
Yeah.
You have to go reference a rhythm, a melody,
Yeah.
and like chord, you know? Rhythm, chord, and melody.
It's like establishing, you know, one thing and
Right.
then being able to play over that, you know, but always going back to establishing a new chord or a new, you know, progression or whatever. Yeah.
Right. So if you're playing with another guitar player at church, and we both play with multiple people, you know, every week, right? It's like different people on the rotation.
Yeah.
And you all have your favorites, you know what I mean? There's a couple of guys who if I had my way, I'd play with them every single week. It's so easy. I know what they're gonna do. Like, I know how they play.
Yeah.
And so I know what I should do to be around them.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you approach that? Do you just say rhythm and lead? Do you say high, low? What do you do? Do you actually split up parts like on the record itself?
It's a good question. The rotation's a big part of it, like you said, because certain guys want certain things and other people don't care. You know, I play with John too a lot.
Yeah.
And he and I have played, you know, for years together now, and so we kind of just settle into he's happy to play and enjoys playing like big chunky rhythm chords, and was like, let me just lay that down, and then I'll take high stuff and lead stuff. You know, I think high low is a good way of thinking about it. When I say rhythm and lead, that's what I mean. You know, so it's almost synonymous, you know?
Yeah, so for me, I noticed one thing is like, I noticed this when I came out to Nashville, the caliber of like guitar players, I feel like for me moved up from San Francisco to Nashville. And I ran into these guys, especially the studio guys, the guys who are producers but play guitar also.
Yeah.
They were kind of like, they would say to me high low. You know what I mean? And then I would watch them play, and I realized some of them were super tasty in the low stuff. Like, they would have a lot of passing stuff. They would play like octave chords and slide, even though they were playing the lower part. And they would throw in like sort of melodic stuff and little riffs, especially the producers.
Hooks,
yeah, they would throw in some little hooks and stuff that I just felt like fits so well like in a track, because they're producers. That's right. They're like producers and guitar players, so they're always thinking what sounds good with the band. Like when I go to this bridge or second verse, what's like a rhythmic thing I could do? That it might be very small, and I noticed, wow, that low thing, like it's not just lead rhythm, high low. There's a lot of stuff you can do lower. You know what I mean? Just playing around that chord and even coming up a little bit. To me, high low, like when I tell someone, you know, when I'm playing, like I'll take high, you take low. I'm thinking the low guy's going to travel up to 9. You know what I mean? Like there's voicing, like, you know, there's chords all over there. Maybe he could jump up for something slightly higher at a moment, but for me, I'm thinking 7 and up, fret 7 and up, right? And then especially I want to try to have something around 12 and be around that, like, you know, really give us space when I'm just, and a lot of times we're just making it up.
Yeah.
You just listen to the other guy.
Yeah, there's a mentioning the rotation, so there's another guy that plays on our team, and we've been really getting into the tutorial videos, like from Bethel or from Hillsong. And so I think he's bored, you know, with electric guitar, and so that's his and slash I's way of getting into. We'll send each other videos and go, you take the bottom guy, I'll take the top guy.
Right.
And it's just like the little windows where, you know. And so when I come, you talk about knowing what he's going to play. He knows exactly what I'm going to play because we learned the official video, you know. And it's kind of fun because it's like,
that's a good. I love being prepared. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Sometimes though, like I've talked about this in other videos, sometimes I'm showing up on a Sunday morning and we don't have any music.
Right.
And that's usually happening with people at my church who are more songwriters and artists, and who are a little more they're Pentecostal in their background. So like walking in and not knowing what you're doing is just a thing that they're up for. Now we know their tunes.
Yeah.
So it's not like we're playing that song for the first time. It's like we've played that song 100 times, right? And so, but I know like the other guitar player, like that guy, I know what he's going to do. He's always going to play rhythm. He's always going to do this stuff. So I'm going to go extra up high. Or that guy is, he doesn't really listen to me, right? Like he's tougher to play with. He doesn't really listen and he goes super high. Yeah. So I'm just going to go really low. Like, you know, it's not always ideal. In terms of
a little ebb and flow.
Yeah, you just, it's a give and take, man. It's a give and take. I think one thing that as like a church guitar player, and this is like for the Sunday church guys, right? As a praise and worship guitar player and like doing what we do, you gotta let grace abound. Like,
totally, yeah.
I just walk in and like straight up, like no ego. What would you like to do? I always ask the other guy. I know what they're I know already what they're gonna say. But for those one or two people who it's like, I know they don't really listen to me in the monitor. I know they're just listening to themselves, just doing their thing, whether I'm here or not.
Right.
Like that's just how they play. They're just, here's my parts and that's what I'm gonna do, or this is what I like doing. It's just like, hey, let them do that. Now my challenge becomes, how do I play around them and like find a spot and make the band sound great? And then for other people, it's like, what are you going to do? Oh, yeah, I do know the leads for this song. Yeah, go ahead. Like, they're going to play some chords because they don't know the song as well. And, like, I know, you know, the lead parts or something, or I've played this song before. You just, and that's a challenge. I think there's something in there about musicianship, about flexibility and just doing your thing, you know?
Yep.
Let's get a haircut.
Let's do it. Oh, we're here. Gosh.
We're here.